Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Writerly webinar on how to find your readers. I'm Kelsey of Writerly, and I'm very pleased to introduce our webinar leader today, Catherine Sears of Booktrope. Catherine is CMO and co-founder of Booktrope, and Booktrope is a very unique team publishing platform that I encourage you all to go take a look at. I think it's very cool. So I'm handing it on over to Catherine.
Well, good morning, and thank you very much, Kelsey. And I will be happy to talk a little bit more about Booktrope later, but I'd rather start with the material, and then if we have time, we can go back and talk about what we're doing. You are, of course, more than welcome to check out our website for more information as well. Now, as Kelsey stated, what we're going to talk this morning about is finding your readers, finding your target market. But before we dive into exactly how you do that, I do want to set the groundwork a little bit and share some information with you about the publishing industry and some of the underlying principles that go into the rationale behind why you would want to find your target readership versus doing a more traditional PR or publicity campaign. So without further ado, I just love that word, ado. I'm going to go ahead and jump into the slides. And if at any point you can't see the slides or something else I'm referencing, or you can't hear me, please do let us know. Okay. First, I'm going to answer the number one question that I hear, and that is right now. The question, of course, is when do I start my marketing? And if you're asking the question, it's time to start. So presumably you're on this webinar because you've either written a book or you plan to write a book. Even just planning to write a book, you should start thinking about your marketing. And I know you're saying to me, gosh, I can't possibly do that, Catherine, because I haven't finalized what my book is going to be about. You probably have a pretty good idea. You probably know roughly what you'd like to write about, and that is enough for you to start your marketing if you're using this methodology. So before we dive into exactly what that is and how you do it, I want to give you an idea of where things are from a publishing perspective. And the reason I do this is for two things. One, I want you to understand that there is a lot of opportunity, and I want you also to understand that that comes with a lot of competition. So it's important that you understand what you're doing and don't just flail around. You got to dive in with a purpose. Dive in, but dive in with a purpose. So this is last year's data from the Book Industry Study Group. Their new data should be coming out in June, but this gives you an idea of the quantity of material changing hands in the publishing industry. So that top line, if you can't see it very well, is 3 billion, that's with a B, and that is net unit sales. So that's 3 billion books that changed hands last year. And that is digital and print. Now, what does that mean for those of us who are either in the self-publishing, independent publishing, or alternative publishing space like Booktrope? Clearly, it's more important to us to worry about digital books. Now, the reason this slide in particular is great news is that orange band. That orange band, as you can see, since 2008, which is when they started tracking this data, has gone bananas. And that's great news for those of us who are on the technology side of publishing because...
Catherine, yeah. I have to pause you just for a moment. We see your PowerPoint wireframe or frame, but we don't see the different slides. We're still looking at the very first slide.
Oh, interesting.
I think we've only seen your first slide.
Okay, so you did not see the charts at all?
No, now we're seeing the charts.
Okay, interesting. So that means I'm going to have to, every time I change slides, apparently I'm going to have to re-enlarge. So can you still see it? Okay, well, that's interesting. Let's try getting rid of this at least for you. Okay, Kelsey, I'm going to change slides. Can you let me know if it changes? Okay. Well, this isn't ideal. Apologies for that. Apparently, the technology does not like it when I go into slideshow view. Okay, so backing up, this is overall net unit sales, and you can see 3 billion. Uh, Now, this is the publishing market by net revenue. So there is that all-important orange band that I was just talking about. Okay. Now, there's another piece of information that I think is really critical for you to see, and that is this data from Pew Internet Research. And Pew Internet Research, as the name would imply, it actually tracks trends in various internet spaces. This particular data came from a study that they did on e-readership. And what it shows us is why people are reading on e-readers and which points of interest they are reading more often than others. So what I find especially important here is that overall, people who read on e-readers are reading more than those who read in print. And in fact, when they quantified the data overall, they found that they're reading about 40% more than their print counterparts. So the more that orange band in our last slide grows, and the more tablets and e-readers proliferate in society, the more books will be sold overall. So again, this is encouraging news. This is great news for all of us who are using those methodologies. The other thing to keep in mind when you're talking about what you're going to write is when people choose to read in e-reader versus in print may also vary depending on what you've written. So you can see here that children's books in particular still lag quite a bit behind, in print being more important than tablet or e-reader. That doesn't mean you can't write a children's book and self-publish it. It just means that you're definitely going to want to factor in things like create space or doing a print run of some sort, because you're less likely to get penetration in your ebook space. And when we start talking about target market, this actually has pretty extreme relevancy, because where you're marketing varies depending on how you are selling your book. Okay? So the opportunity is absolutely there. The consumers are reading more, not less, as the tablet e-reader phenomenon takes off. The primary shift in the publishing industry for the negative is actually in the space of mass market paperbacks. And unfortunately, bookstore sales and bookstores in general are suffering as a result. But for those of us who are on the fringes of this revolution, this is good news. So while it does break my little bookworm heart to know that bookstores are hurting, from my CMO and co-founder position of Booktrope, it's good news. So let's dive into the underlying principle around what I talk about, and that is word of mouth marketing. Now, word of mouth marketing as a term is not particularly new, and as a concept, it's even older. Word of mouth marketing, quite simply, is the idea that customer recommendations do your marketing for you. Now, one of the better known groups online that tracks word of mouth marketing and talks about the specific techniques is WOMA, Word of Mouth Marketing Association. I know that's quite a mouthful, but they have a lot of great resources, and I encourage you to spend some time there if you're really interested in the principles. But in general, I believe that book marketing equals internet marketing, which all tracks back to word of mouth marketing. Now, the most important thing to know about word of mouth marketing, or rather the most important word in the term word of mouth marketing, is actually mouth. And what we're looking for is not an audience. We're not looking for an enormously huge group of people to engage with. We're looking for individuals. We are looking for a mouth to do your marketing for you. The best illustration of how this works, and this will give you insight into how old I am, was the, I believe it was Fabergé Organics shampoo commercial back in the 70s. And there was the pretty lady with the blonde hair said, you know, I had fabulous hair, so I told a friend who told two friends who told two friends, and you saw her become the screen with, you know, 50 people on it. And that is essentially the principle behind word of mouth marketing. Now, what the internet does is it allows us to do that even more simply. Now, back to my favorite Pew Internet Research folks, they also looked at where people are getting book recommendations, and you can see that overwhelmingly today, those recommendations come from family, friends, and coworkers. And if you're thinking to yourself, wow, I'm kind of an introvert, I don't have 500 family, friends, or coworkers, not to worry. The whole point behind what we're going to talk about is how to allow you to make more virtual family, friends, and coworkers so that you can amplify your word of mouth marketing efforts. The internet lets us do that. Until then, you really were hampered and dependent on either going on a physical book tour, going out to bookstores, doing personal events, and doing word of mouth marketing the old-fashioned way, using face-to-face techniques. But because of the social media revolution, we have the ability to use word of mouth marketing techniques via Twitter, via Facebook, via Pinterest, etc. Now, this does not mean that it's going to be easy. You are definitely going to have to put some effort into this, and it's going to take some time. Like any habit, depending on whose quote you prefer, Malcolm Gladwell says 10,000 hours. The statistic I heard when I was a corporate training was 21 days of focused effort. You are going to have to turn this into a habit. It's going to have to become a way of life for it to be effective. You can't set aside a day each week and make that your marketing day. It doesn't work that way. If family, friends, and coworkers are the people using their mouths on your behalf, you have to treat them that way. Your target market has to some degree become your family, friends, and coworkers. And you don't set aside Wednesday as the day that you interact with your family, friends, and coworkers. Or if you do, you have a much different lifestyle than most of us, and you'll probably have to adjust your thinking for this to work for you. So another statistic from our friends at WOMA, and that is how much influence people have on what decisions are being made. I saw an article on, I want to say it was GeekWire or TechCrunch the other day, about Facebook becoming the Goodreads for everything. And Facebook is integrating into their system the ability to make recommendations on movies, TV, books, etc. And that's pretty smart on their part, because that is largely where people go today for recommendations. They turn to their social media networks and they'll put a broadcast out and they'll say, I'm looking for my next book recommendation, or I need a plumber in Saskatchewan, or whatever it is that they're looking for. And they are much more likely to take the recommendation of a Facebook friend than they are to take the recommendation of the Sunday newspaper, which is, I don't know about you, but that's where my parents always looked to find their next movie or their next book review. And now we're using Facebook, we're using Twitter. Okay, so let's dive into the meat of the matter. Great, you've written a book. How do you figure out who your target market is? And I'm a broad hint here, it is not your genre, nor is it all readers. So let's talk about who it is. And these are some exercises that I use, and if we were face-to-face, I would walk you through these and we would do some of these together. And you are welcome to do one, do all of them, and I will be happy to provide my slide set to Kelsey or to post it in the group if you want this for a reminder. The one that most authors gravitate towards is that very first one, which is to create a character sketch of your reader as though they're a character in a book. I want you to get really detailed with this. Think of what they do for a living. Are they old? Are they young? Are they married? Are they single? Do they have children? And really describe them as though you were writing them into your book. You can also describe someone who has read and enjoyed your book, but the problem is most of us start our first reader efforts with friends and family. And of course they're going to enjoy your book because they love you and they would never tell you otherwise. So that may or may not be accurate depending on how broadly circulated your book has been. Now, another way to do this, and this was something that I actually used to use when I was acting, if I was having trouble getting into the mind of a character. One of my first acting teachers in college taught me this trick, and it was one that stuck with me. And that is, picture the character in your mind, and if they're female, write down everything that is in their purse. So down to that ratty Kleenex in the bottom of the bag, if that's what's in there. If they're a man, you can describe either what's on their desktop or in their laptop bag, depending on who they are. But get really detailed. I mean, if there's lint in there, tell me there's lint in there. If it is absolutely pristine and spotless, explain that. Because what we're going for here is a really specific person. When you're online using this technique, you're not broadcasting. You're not talking to the masses. You're not talking to your 6,000 followers on Twitter. You're talking to a person. There's a human being on the other side of that screen. And if you treat it that way, if you believe as you are going through this social media jungle that there's a human being reading every word you write, you will behave differently than if you think of them as an audience or as a group. I know that most of you have probably looked at Kelsey's Twitter webinars. I know I watch them, and her 3-to-1 rule is a really great way to remember this, which is you're putting 3 things out there that are relevant content and have nothing to do with marketing you or your book. And if you're thinking of your individual, if you're keeping them in mind, it's really easy to think, what is interesting to them? What article did I read today that this person is going to want to see as well? Now, I'll tell you, having worked with a lot of authors, we have over 100 authors working with us at Trope right now, and almost every author I meet, instinctively, their comfort zone is talking about writing or talking about books. Now, unless you've written a book about writing, this is probably not going to be interesting to your target readership. Your target readership is, as much as I hate to say this, they probably don't much care about the writing process. They care about reading a great story. They care about reading something that takes them out of their day-to-day life or that educates them in some fashion, in particular if you're writing nonfiction. So if you find yourself gravitating towards putting all of the articles out on NetGalley and your book is not about publishing or writing, refocus. Come back to your description. Come back to the contents of their purse and remember who you're talking to. Now, the last exercise, and this is a lot easier if you've finished your book, obviously, is what I call the keyword grab. And if you're really stuck, this can be useful, or if you're trying to find a new direction, and that is to either physically or figuratively grab your book and scroll through it or flip through it randomly and stop and pick a few keywords from the page. Most often books that are, I'll use romance as an example. A romance is probably going to have some romantic terms in there, and that can help you remember and refocus. And as a bonus, keywords are very often also hashtags on Twitter. So if you have a good list of keywords, you can search for hashtags on Twitter, and that can help you find your people. Okay, now you've done your exercise. You've got this person in your mind. What the heck do you do with it? What I want you to do is go have conversations with these people. Go talk to them. If you're new to Twitter, one of the best ways you can get comfortable with it is to find people who are either like-minded as a starting point or within your target audience and join in a conversation with them. You have nothing to lose by talking to people when you're using this method, as long as you're not being offensive, as long as you're being reasonable, as long as you're not butting into what are clearly private conversations. Yes, I know it seems irrational to have a private conversation on Twitter, but you'd be surprised how often people do that. But talk to people and find out what they're interested in. Have conversations that are relevant to them outside of your book. The whole goal here is to find people who are fans of you. If they become fans of you, if they like you, if they like what you have to say, they will discover your work. And we're going to show you a little bit about how that discovery actually takes place in just a minute. But for your starting point, when it comes to word of mouth marketing, when it comes to target marketing, your goal is to have relevant, interesting conversations. Don't worry about tracking back to your book. Be sure that you evolve with your market. You are never done determining your target market. There's never a point where you sit back and go, okay, cool. I have spoken to everyone on Twitter that has anything to do with Christmas, right? If that's your target market or people who love Christmas, you're never actually done. There are people joining who are new every day. If you're tired of talking about Christmas, go back to your keyword list. Find something new that's similar, that speaks to the target market, that's a different topic. You're never done. It's sort of like there was a commercial on for many years where somebody's surfing the internet and all of a sudden the pop-up comes up and it says you have reached the end of the internet. Well, that doesn't ever actually happen. And you're never done marketing either. Okay, you figured out who your target market is. You understand what they want to talk about. All social media is not created equal. There are a lot of places you could have those conversations. These are pretty much the big five. These are the ones that people should start with and you really don't want to ignore. But there are many others. Reddit is very popular, in particular for the male engineering and highly intellectual set. You've got Tumblr. That's very popular with the younger set. So there are lots of different places you could have those conversations. When you are new to social media marketing, I suggest that you have a rudimentary profile everywhere, that you don't ignore anything, but pick the one that's most comfortable for you to start with and focus on. If you're uncomfortable, you're unlikely to do something regularly. And as I mentioned earlier on in the presentation, we're looking for 10,000 hours or 21 days before you've changed your habit. So starting where you're comfortable and branching out from there is a good way to do that. There are commonalities, and we'll go into what those are for some of these platforms. But some of them are pretty easy to ascertain. LinkedIn, for example, if you've written a business book, you would be crazy to ignore LinkedIn. If you have written a book on sales how-to, you would be crazy not to have a YouTube video or two. On the other hand, if you've written a very masculine war thriller, Pinterest is probably not your first target, since that is far more heavily populated by women between a certain age range who are more focused on crafts and home. So you do want to put some thought into this. So part of it is your comfort level, but part of it is also where is your target market. And I know you're probably thinking, great, Catherine, how am I supposed to figure that out? Well, lucky for us, the Pew Internet Research folks come to the rescue again. And the Pew Internet Research folks tell us some broad generalities of where our target market might be found. Now, You're also in luck because if you've studied writing, and most of you have, I assume, you start writing with what you know as a broad generality. If you write what you know, it's probably also something that's near and dear to your heart, which also means that if it's a place you're comfortable, it's also likely to be a place where your target market is comfortable. So when in doubt, your comfort level is a guiding factor. So Facebook is absolutely the broadest demographic for adults in general. And interestingly enough, the heaviest user base that's growing in the internet right now, this comes from yet another Pew Internet Research study, is the 50 and over category. So in general, these numbers are shifting to older. Um, Pinterest is fascinating to those of us who study these statistics because up until Pinterest came around, there wasn't any one site that was more popular for the, I'll call it the classic stay-at-home mom set. And it was originally geared towards women in particular who liked scrapbooking, which makes sense. If you use Pinterest, you think, gosh, yeah, it's essentially an online scrapbook. So it was really nice for those of us in particular who market women's fiction and romance because it was a much cleaner fit with that group of people. Instagram is part of Facebook now, so we'll see where that ends up going. Tumblr is an interesting one because it trends much younger. I'm actually surprised Reddit doesn't show in this graph, but I find Reddit to be particularly effective for those of you who are targeting more male-dominated genres and audiences. If you are a sci-fi writer, for example, Reddit is very popular with the engineering set and the bleeding edge of technology set, which is interesting to me because in a lot of ways from a functional perspective it reminds me of the very first chat boards and forums that we saw when the internet was first getting going in the late 90s. And as a final slide, I'll tell you that you're part artist, part scientist. If you look back through my slides, you'll see that the exercises I had you do, as I mentioned, were partly acting exercises, which is a very artistic and a creative side. But I showed you a lot of statistics, which are very scientific. And so what I find works best for those of us who are creative people who are diving into this new world of social media marketing is if you go with your gut, but then do a gut check by looking at the statistics. So think instinctively, I'm drawn towards Pinterest, and then go back and check and say, yeah, okay, I think that my target readership is going to be on Pinterest. And when in doubt, go back to the exercise, go back to your profile of your target reader. And don't be afraid to do a couple of those because, you know, of course, there's not only one human being on the planet who's going to read your book. There are many thousands of them, we hope. So write a new one every couple of months. And if you're brave enough to read your reviews on Amazon or Goodreads, this can also give you an idea of who is reading your book, and that might adjust who your target market is. Sometimes we'll all fall into the trap of I'll use the old cliche, drinking the Kool-Aid, and we drink our own Kool-Aid and we become so enamored with our own marketing message that we start to believe it a little bit too much. So sometimes reading your reviews can give you a little bit of a gut check in that regard. So just real quick before we stop, what I want to do is shift over to questions. Okay, so let me stop my screen share here. So question from Brigitte, individual human beings. The giants of the internet, Amazon, Google, Facebook, do not treat their audiences as individual human beings, quite the opposite. So there's quite a disconnect between the platforms that provide the technology all these human beings use and the content creators who wish to have relationships with the human beings. My question is, do you feel that these massive platforms enable or hinder the possibilities for these relationships? That is a great question. So here's what I suggest you think about with Amazon. Amazon is a lot like a search engine when you look at it from a functional perspective. So my former profession before I was in book marketing, I was a marketing consultant, and I did a lot of search engine optimization. And Amazon, if you dive into the nuts and bolts, is very much like that. So if you are thinking of your target market and you're looking at things like keywords and you are paying attention to what they want to hear, the description you write for your book should reflect that. If the description that you write for your book and the bio that you put online for yourself would speak to your target market, you are much more likely to be tapping directly into the algorithms that use things like keyword density and keyword search within Amazon. And again, you're more likely to then get in front of your target reader. One thing I can also tell you is a good way to know whether you're hitting your target reader is if you start to see 1 or 3-star reviews that say things like, I thought this book was about X and it was really about Y, or I thought this was a very serious book and it was light and fluffy. If you start to see comments like that, it's a fairly good indicator that your description in Amazon has not been optimized for the proper reader. You're giving the wrong impression of your book. So this does work for that as well. If you focus on your readership, if you focus on this individual, you will write a description they want to read.
Just 1 second, I just want to tell people, if you have a question for Catherine, you can either post it in the comments on our event page, or if you're watching this live on YouTube, you can post a question in the comment sections under our video. There is a slight delay between what we're actually doing and what you're seeing. So if you post your question right now, it might take us about 30 seconds in the video to get around to it. So Catherine, if you could stall for 30 seconds for the delay, that would be great.
Sure. In fact, what I'll do is I will go ahead and pull up a couple of examples for you of what this all translates back to. So it's all great in theory, what I've been sharing with you, but how do I actually go do that? And the example I'm going to give you is one of Book Trope's most successful authors. And when I say successful, her first book, River Song, has sold more than 80,000 copies. And her second book is approaching 10,000 copies. And her third book launched last week, and it is currently in the top 10 in its category on Kindle. So she's very successful. And I'm lucky because she's a good friend of mine, and as a result, when we started doing her book marketing, she was very cooperative. And she literally said, Catherine, I will do whatever you ask me to do. So when I told her to get on Twitter, she did in fact say, I am 40 years old, what the heck am I going to tweet about? I just put in a load of laundry, I just made a cup of coffee, who cares? Well, lucky for her, her target market actually does care, because when we did the work and figured out who her target market is, her target market are women over the age of 35, mostly who have children. Some are single moms, some are married, more work than not, but there's quite a large number of stay-at-home moms. But in general, they were women a lot like her, and quote-unquote lived ordinary lives. So what Tess writes about is being a mom, but not just being a mom, but those moments of inspiration, those moments of despair, those things that make you feel like you are alone on the planet for that moment. And she gets very good response to that. You can see this is her blog. And I do encourage all writers to have a blog, not because I think you're going to have thousands and thousands of followers to your blog, but it gives you a way to express yourself in a format that you're comfortable, and it gives you a way to express yourself regularly. And if you're talking about search engine optimization, it gives you a way to keep your content fresh. You can see Tessa's blog has a very light, soft feel. Again, this speaks to who we believe her target market are. And if you were to go in and read her blog, you would find that it very much keeps with this theme. She varies the topic, obviously. We wouldn't want to talk about the exact same thing every single day, but it very much speaks to her target market. Every once in a while, she'll talk about a book event, or she'll run a contest, or she'll talk about writing. But more often than not, she talks about being a mom, and she talks about her divorce, and she really puts it all out there because that's what her books are about. Her books are women's contemporary fiction. They are very hopeful. They are very romantic. And that is what her target audience wants to read from her. Now, how does this translate into the other mediums? Now, as I mentioned, her target market, well, they are on Pinterest, and they are on Facebook. So I'll show you one of her Pinterest pages so you can get an idea for what types of things she does there. So this is one of her Pinterest boards. This is one of her inspiration boards. And you can see it just has pictures that she likes, that she knows will talk back to that target market. And she has a board specifically for writing, and she has other boards. But most of what she does, most of her activity, speaks back to that same target market. And if you were to go to her Facebook page, you would find the same type of information. If you read her books, if you were to read her descriptions on Amazon, same type of information. So we've got a really targeted focus for her, and it does work. So I'm seeing that we have no more questions at this point. Kelsey, do you want me to give... Oh, Abigail, you have a question. Yes. I'm pausing.
Sorry. Yeah, my question is about speaking. You know, I kind of have an audience of, widows and people going through loss, and I do speaking where I actually sort of have to pay, because I don't usually get paid for these things.
Right.
And I'm just wondering if is that worth doing, to like fly myself down to do these speaking gigs? It's not a huge audience that I'm meeting, but I am meeting them in person. What is the value of that?
Meeting people in person still has value, and I do encourage people to do events. I like that you are doing speaking engagements rather than a traditional book signing. If you are comfortable doing that, I think speaking engagements are a great way to do that. But again, as I mentioned, authors tend to have a comfort zone where it's talking about writing. And unless you've written a book about writing, your readership is not going to be as interested in coming to those events. So speaking events are valuable as long as they are geared towards your target audience. Now, there's a principle that I didn't mention much here, but it's very much about word-of-mouth marketing, and it's the principle of the raving fan. Now, the raving fan is someone who not just goes out there and says, "Oh yeah, I read this good book, it's great." They're the person who posts their review everywhere they can. They bought their book on Amazon, but they post the review on Barnes & Noble and Goodreads and Library Thing and everywhere else, and their blog. And they buy it as gifts for everyone they've ever met. And sort of the holy grail of word-of-mouth marketing is this raving fan. And the one thing that speaking events do better than the internet events is they do a better job of really connecting you with these raving fans. So that can be a huge benefit. I will say this: if you are not a good public speaker, if you are not comfortable doing speaking events, then you may not want to do this, because it could backfire if you don't come across the way that you intend. And I don't recommend doing a traditional book signing for anything other than your own satisfaction. I mean, we've all had our dream of, the line of people out the door waiting to get our signed book, and that's a totally reasonable, rational dream. But the reality is, if you go to a strange city and a strange bookstore where you don't know anyone and you're not yet a household name, A book signing is frankly a little bit of an uncomfortable event because you're sitting at a bookstore and you have a stack of books next to you and no one knows who you are. And if they approach you and ask you who you are and then don't want to buy your book, they feel really uncomfortable. So in my experience, the classic bookstore book tour, you're going to be lucky if you sell 10 books. So have an event, have a launch party at a local wine bar, have whatever you want, but know that it's for you. If you have the ability to have an event that is more publicly interesting and accessible above and beyond the purpose being to buy your book, you will be much more successful having an event. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
So another question, it seems that romance and women's genres do well because there are so many women out there looking for that. I don't write that. I write historical crime thrillers, psychological, yeah, okay, literature that makes people think, which is not exactly entertainment. What would your advice be on how to find people who want to read this type of work? That's a great question. So one of our most successful books at Book Trope is a book called Memoirs Aren't Fairy Tales, and it's by Marnie Mann. And it's fiction told from the perspective of a memoir, and the memoir is of a girl next door turned heroin addict and prostitute. Doesn't get much darker than that. And it is very successful. Now, what Marnie does, she did huge research, by the way. She was not herself ever a heroin addict, but she spent years researching addiction and has addiction in her family. That's what inspired her to kind of take this journey as a person. Marnie spends a lot of time talking about heroin addiction. She's on Twitter talking about it. She does her homework and finds out what hashtags are being used by people to talk about addiction. She spends time talking to people who are involved with Al-Anon and families affected by addicts. She spends a lot of time talking about this particular topic. It's a dark topic. You have to be willing to engage on that. The other thing you can do is find articles or topics that are trending that are of interest to your target market. So I'll use a short story I read recently by one of our authors that takes place during the war in Sarajevo. So he might take the time to look for articles on a day-to-day basis to talk about the war in Afghanistan. He might want to comment on those articles. He might make himself well known in the areas where people are discussing these topics. I would also say Reddit is a good area to find the more serious topics. People like to talk about news, and they like to talk about international events in particular. It is a little bit harder to get the traditional literary fiction pundits and gatekeepers interested if you're an indie author, but it can be done. I would say you definitely need to have a blog, and you need to bring into your blog your thoughts on events and things going on in our society that are interesting to your target market. So, for example, when the Occupy movement was huge, you would have wanted to spend a lot of time kind of dissecting that and talking about why the Occupy movement was huge. So that would be my suggestion to you, is to make yourself known for being interested in topics and subject matter that is also interesting to your target market. And for sure, women, the romance genre is huge. In fact, BISG's report last week talked about how romance, the genre in women's fiction, was nearly single-handedly responsible for the growth in ebooks last year. So if you are lucky enough to be one of those people who can choose which genre you write in, I wouldn't discount that as being a factor. There is nothing wrong with asking yourself, well, which of these 4 books in my head do I want to write next? If it's going to sell and that's important to you, then that should be a factor. On the other hand, if you're writing because you want people to read your work, and it's less important that volume is a factor, then absolutely just write whatever your passion is for this next title. Do we have any other questions?
There are no more questions posted right now, but after the webinar, if people still have questions, even if they're watching this weeks later, if you leave a comment on YouTube, we'll get an email, and we'll pass it on to Catherine, or we'll try to do it our best to answer it. So even if you're watching this webinar long after the recording, you can still write a question, and we will do our best to get to it and give you some help. Catherine, do you have any closing comments or suggestions?
Sure. And as far as reaching out, you are also more than welcome to reach out to me directly on Twitter. My handle is ksearsbooks, all one word. You can like the Book Trope page on Facebook and leave a message for me there as well. In closing, I would really encourage you all to just jump in. You have to start somewhere. You really should start with topics and things that are interesting to you. For Birgit, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly. If you've written these books that are psychological thrillers, why? What sparked your interest in that genre? Was it a story you read in the newspaper? Was it a movie or a book that you read yourself? Start there and move forward, but jump in and try it. And then the last thing I'll say is, for those of you who are curious about Book Trope is a new type of publishing model. And what we do is, we are not self-publishing, so we don't accept all manuscripts, so you do have to submit to us. Our submission is available on our website, booktrope.com. And part of our submission process is being evaluated by a pool of early readers. Our early readers are people who just love to read. Some are book industry professionals, some are just ordinary folks who enjoy reading. And the reason for that is, I think it's less important to know what an editor who's been doing this for 20 years thinks than it is to find out what an average reader thinks. And then what we do is, once a book is accepted into our process, you're put into our back-end system, which is called Team Trope, where a team is formed, and the team includes you, the author, editor, book designer, marketing manager, proofreading, and of course Book Trope. And everybody on the team works for a percentage of the profit. That's how we can do what we do without charging any fees. And Book Trope makes our money by getting a percentage of the profit as well. And we're very upfront about who gets what. The author gets the largest share, then Book Trope, then the marketing manager, and on down the line. So we are essentially trying to bridge the gap between self-publishing and the big 6 publishers. So that's what we're about, and you can find all of our folks and what we're up to on Twitter using the hashtag BookTrope. And you're welcome to reach out to our authors, and you can also find our books on our website or by searching on Amazon. Look up Book Trope. We have 121 maybe as of today books, and about 200 people working in our publishing team platform right now. So that's us. That's what we're about, and I hope you've gotten something out of today. And like I said, don't hesitate to reach out if you have further questions. I'm also a contributor on bookpromotion.com. I write articles there every Thursday. And if you are going to be at BEA next week, I will be on a panel with 4 other fabulous digital marketing experts on Wednesday at 1 o'clock. You can find me by searching on my last name on the BEA schedule session tool thingy. And it would also be great to see you there. And that's what I have for you today.
Thank you so much, Catherine, and thanks for donating your time and volunteering your expertise to the Writerly community. And I do encourage everyone to go check out Book Trope. Thank you.
Thanks so much, and we're big fans of Writerly, so thank you.